Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening, this is your host, Dan Zupansky, for the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Not since the Green River Killer had the Pacific Northwest been terrorized by so savage a serial killer. By day, Robert Lee Yates Jr., 48, was a respected father of 5, a skilled helicopter pilot who served in Desert Storm and the National Guard, and a man no one suspected of a deadly hidden life. By night, he prowled the streets where prostitutes gathered, gaining their trust before betraying them with a bullet to the head. On August 26, 1997, the half-naked body of 16-year-old street prostitute Jennifer Joseph was found in an empty lot in Spokane, Washington. The same day, the decomposed body of prostitute Heather Hernandez, 20, was discovered in a wheat field. Both women had been shot point-blank in the head. By the day after Christmas, 4 more women were added to the mounting death toll. All were found with plastic grocery bags tied over their heads. The gruesome signature of a killer who had sexually violated each one of them after snuffing out their lives. Spokane's elite Homicide Task Force intense investigation turned up only one common link: a white Corvette driven by a frequent customer of Spokane's prostitutes. Investigators found a button from Jennifer Joseph's blouse and multiple bloodstains in a vehicle recently sold by Yates Jr. On October 18, 2000, Yates pled guilty to 13 murders and was sentenced to 408 years, sentenced for 2 similar murders in Washington, Pierce County. Yates is now on death row awaiting execution. The book that we're profiling tonight is Body Count, and it's the Body Count-RE-Release with my special guest, the incomparable Burl Barer. Welcome back to the program, and thank you for this interview, Burl Barer.
Well, it's always a pleasure to be with you, Dan, and incomparable, that's quite a phrase. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming on the program, because it's always a lot of fun, and I didn't even know true crime was fun. I didn't realize that. So
yeah, well, you have to almost approach some of it with a slight sense of gallows humor, because it's so tragic, and these stories are so painful that it's not that I could compare anything to being an EMT or a homicide detective in any way, shape, or form. But it can be very emotionally painful and draining to write about these kinds of things, as you well know.
Absolutely, absolutely. It does take a little bit out of you, so you do at least try to regain some of that humor that you definitely have put aside to concentrate on something very, very serious. And this is one of those cases where, a very unusual serial killer.
Well,
we'll get.
I want to tell you something. There's been a shocking new update to this story. It will probably be in the ebook edition. We've already gone to press, of course, on the paperback. It came out yesterday with an update.
Right.
But there were 3 women that they originally thought were victims of Robert Lee Yates, the Spokane serial killer. As it turns out, the modus operandi and a few things were different enough, and with testing, it turns out that these 3 women, the first 3, Yolanda Sapp, Kathy Brisbois, and I can't think of the third one right now, hope he forgives me, were murdered by somebody else, someone they called the Riverside Killer, who was never caught. They sent off the DNA from underneath the fingernails of the victims, and they didn't have a match. Well, science has advanced over the past few years. Testing is more refined, and just recently they sent off these samples again for analysis, and bingo, this time they found a match. Someone who was already in custody on federal firearms violations, a woman who used to be a man.
Wow.
The alleged culprit had left Spokane, gone to Bangkok, had sexual reassignment surgery, and returned as a woman. But of course, the DNA stays the same, and allegedly, this person, Don or Donna, whoever you want to call him or her, is more than a likely suspect, and they are in custody and will undoubtedly be charged with those 3 homicides.
Wow, fascinating update, to say the least. And the thing is with this book too is this is a re-release by popular demand from Pinnacle in Kensington. And it's interesting now that you talk about the ebook and then publish on demand. It really, not that the book business is in great shape, but this is one bit of good news in terms of they used to discontinue books, didn't they? Just people couldn't find them after a while. Wasn't that the case?
Well, yeah, that's both a blessing and a curse. If a book is out of print for 5 years, the author gets the rights back and can resell it or print it themselves. However, if it's an ebook, it'll never go out of print, which means the author will never get the rights back, even if it's not promoted or isn't selling well. But that's just, there's always a trade-off. There's pluses in everything and minuses in everything. And the nice thing about the ebooks, I was talking to my editor at Kensington. I said, on the ebook, we can do an update on this new information very easily. It's a matter of a file upload. And we do have some bonus photographs in the ebook edition, new photographs that aren't in the paperback edition. So there's always little added inducements. Both, of course, have a few thousand new words at the end with updates about what happened to everybody, where are they now, etc. But it's and I think I may have mentioned when we spoke before, but most people probably haven't heard that. The very first people that Robert Lee Yates Jr. killed, as far as we know, were friends with my family in my hometown of Walla Walla, Washington.
Right. Yeah, tell us about that. Tell us, because one of the very interesting things when I spoke to you last time, and it was a long time ago, is that there was 13 other authors. That's how important this serial killer was and how interesting he was, and again, how unusual this case was and how savage a killer, that there was 13 other authors vying for this book deal. And you were selected, and part of the reason...
And I wasn't vying for it. I was actually kind of avoiding it because it was too close to home. Like I say, the first victims were friends of my family in my little hometown of Walla Walla, Washington. One of the last victims was someone who I also knew personally, on and off girlfriend of a friend of mine in Spokane, Arthur Armstead. In fact, I saw her not too long before she was murdered. And so I felt a little bit close to it. My daughter had gone to school with the serial killer's kids. We lived in the same town. And I had, personal connection to it. And from a journalistic standpoint, you try not to. But they said, well, listen, you're obviously the guy to do it because you know the environs, you know the people, you know the situations, the towns, the culture, even know the people. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. But I wound up being a character in the book under an assumed name. So when you come across the fellow Jeff Reynolds, the distance-reading true crime author in Walla Walla, that's actually me. I changed my name so I wouldn't be in my own book.
Well, it's a lot of fun when you are, though, Burl. Well, once you are. But you're noted for that in your books anyway, from creating little aliases, right?
A lot of people don't want their real names used, and sometimes there's no reason to use their real name because they're only connected to the story tangentially or by blood relation, and you don't need the aggravation, the humiliation. So as a courtesy, you give them an assumed name. Sometimes I've had people get mad at me for not using assumed names in some of the cases, but as I say, when you're writing a book about, say, Ted Bundy, you're not going to change his name to Ralph Schwartz, just to spare his family any embarrassment. It's too late for that.
Yeah, the thing that I found very interesting, too, is when we spoke last time, too, is that you just touched on it. You had a friend named Arthur, and you were really good friends with him, and at the time, that's what you first met Darla. And then you found out a little bit in conversation with Darla, which maybe you could tell us about that little conversation that you had with her, kind of warning her.
Oh, yes.
It's interesting because that is really a very telling part of this story, really.
Well, I'd gone to Spokane, actually, for the Bloomsday marathon race my son was running, and afterwards I stopped to see my friend Arthur, who was staying, he had parental problems, was staying in a motel. And while we're sitting there talking, this extremely attractive young lady comes in wearing, this tank top and cut-off jean shorts so you could see all the way to Argentina. And she sits down and she starts bragging that she ripped a guy off for $500. Right. And wait a second, tell me this. Well, she was basically $20 to $40 street hooker, it turns out. But this fellow, a very nice guy, clean guy, traveling salesman, not dangerous, offered her $500 for the weekend to stay with him in the finest hotel in town twice a month for the next year. Well, considering that would be a heck of a good job, security wouldn't be, as dangerous as being on the street. But being short-sighted, she took the first $500 and ran away. Yeah. And I said to her, Darla, that was not very bright, not only from an economic standpoint, but this is how women in your line of work get, disfigured or killed. Because you may not remember him, but I guarantee you, he will never, ever forget you. And men are very vulnerable in those situations. And you do that with the wrong guy, and you could wind up dead. And the next time I saw anything of her was the pictures of the body dump site where Robert Lee Yates had killed her and dumped her body. She was wearing the Mickey Mouse sweatshirt that my friend Arthur, that actually was his, and he had lent it to her that day. So it was a tragic story.
And what you had said, too, is that your friend Arthur had actually witnessed Robert Yates picking her up for a date.
Yeah, I think she had been on a date with him once before and wasn't particularly enthusiastic. Apparently, he'd gotten a little strange or violent and scared her, but he apologized and was offering her significantly more money. Arthur said, I don't think this is a good idea. But she said, she's very headstrong, do what she's going to do. And he sat on the porch and watched her go off and get in Yates' car and drive away, and that was the last time anyone saw her alive.
Now, this is a good time to sort of not get into great detail, but at least this is why I thought this guy was so unusual. It's very unusual for there to be no sort of events whatsoever. But tell us a little bit about the background of Robert Lee Yates Jr., because, again, this is quite unusual. Tell us about
Well, yes, it is unusual. He did have a rather nice upbringing, except for the fact that I think it was his grandmother killed his grandfather with an axe, or vice versa. He wasn't there for that. He was allegedly molested as a youngster by one of the neighbors, but he had a good upbringing. He had wonderful parents, really wonderful father, rather religious, spiritual upbringing, very active in the church. He was greatly admired. He was married once previously. That didn't go well. His wife apparently didn't appreciate him having drilled a hole in the wall to watch his neighbors have sex, so they wound up getting a divorce. He married his second wife. They had, I think, 5 kids. He was a Desert Storm veteran, a hard-working guy. I mean, he worked in this aluminum manufacturing plant in Spokane, the kind of work that someone much younger, and you think younger, stronger, able to put up with more physical stress and aggravation, because he wasn't, a youngster, but he worked his rear off at that job, and people really admired him. He was a good family man, like I say, a veteran, church-going guy, the last human being anyone would suspect. Even the potential victims are people he knew, and he dated virtually every working girl in Spokane. There was one that actually was like in love with him, took him home to meet the folks. Just thought no one could imagine that it was him.
So he really did have this alter ego where he was this upstanding, conformist, non-drug taking, so this
he had a double life.
Well, complete double life, yeah. And now you talk
too, yeah.
Yeah. Now you talk about the other end of town, the mean streets here and East Sprague, and describe this area, because this is where his hunting grounds after your two people that you did know were killed. And you say the reason why that Yates was very intelligent, because what did he do after the two first victims?
Well, he made a real big mistake. I mean, anytime killing people can't be considered a wise move, but he made, for a murderer, a very large tactical mistake. He killed two people who were very well known and high profile and well liked in the community. And he shot them with a .357 Magnum. Well, there was huge investigation, rewards offered. It was a big thing on all the radio stations and in the newspaper in Walla Walla. It was the number one topic, of course, because it was a horrifying thing to have happen. He packed up and left town. But when he started in again on his killings, he made sure that he picked women of high-risk lifestyles, people that wouldn't be immediately missed. And it's very tragic that most and many serial killers do exactly that. They pick on these women that maybe are transit, that maybe can disappear for a few months and no one thinks anything of it. And sadly, there are some people who think these aren't real people, and as long as he's killing them, he's not killing people like us, which is very, very sad. That's why in the book I put a great deal of emphasis on the life stories of these women, so that they weren't just like victim 1, victim 2, victim 3. I want the reader to get a sense of who these women were, that they were daughters, they were mothers, they were sisters. They had, I did a lot of research, which comes out in the book, that dispels a lot of myths that people have about these people, them all being drug addicts or all having been abused or immoral, or no one falls out of the sky and lands on the street like that. Some of them had excellent jobs before, but things happened health-wise, situation-wise, that put them in a situation where they had to do what they had to do.
Yeah, then you say a young girl, 16 years old, Jennifer Joseph, has a little taste of some easy money, and actually tells her father that she enjoys the lifestyle, and she'll be back at school in the fall.
Yeah, right. She didn't take drugs, but she discovered that she really enjoyed performing sex, and she really enjoyed the money, and she liked the camaraderie of the other people she was working with, and she got to travel. It's kind of like, this is how I spent my summer vacation. And she promised she would be, back in school by fall. And, at first the police suspected her boyfriend/pimp of maybe being responsible for the murder, but he was seriously emotionally distraught and very grieved about her murder, and they took him off the suspect list. He may have been her business manager, but he was a very, within that framework, very kind and compassionate guy who actually cared about her a great deal. But, she was kind of an anomaly. This is what she wanted to do for fun. And because of the fact that she was Asian, she was able to make more money. So the other women were jealous of her because, for some reason, young Asian girls are very, very popular.
Sure. Now, tell us about the situation in Spokane. We talked about a little bit about East Sprague, so tell us a little bit more about where this is in terms of geographically in the city, and then also tell us about when do police first link that there must be a serial killer, or link these murders and say that officially that there's a serial killer, and when does this task force get underway, and who does it comprise?
Well, when Jennifer Joseph was found, there was another young lady found the exact same day or the exact same weekend.
Right.
Ms. Hernandez, I believe her name was.
Yeah.
It started to become pretty obvious there was something going on. And they started finding, the bodies would be displayed, dumped, where people could find them. And, a lot of killers do that. They like to show off. And he was no exception. Now, the problem that police departments face when you have a serial killer isn't just catching him. It's having the manpower, the resources, and the money. It is very expensive to hunt for a serial killer. And here you've got Spokane, Washington, which is not a huge city by any stretch of the imagination, without a huge budget for this sort of thing. They put together a task force comprised of the city, the county, and the Washington State Patrol. And, of course, there were politics involved. Anytime you got different agencies working together on who's picking up what part of the budget, who reports to whom, that sort of thing. But these guys were very dedicated, and they did something that was so smart.
Right.
And people could say maybe they did a lot of things wrong, but they did something that was incredibly smart. They realized that the best way to catch this guy is they would need the help and the cooperation of the prostitutes and drug dealers on the street. Well, as you can imagine, prostitutes and drug dealers are about the last people who want to talk to a policeman.
Sure.
Right? So they had to go out and make contact with these people and say, listen, we don't care what you're selling. We don't care what you're doing. None of that matters compared to murder. And we're not using this as an excuse to get information about you to bust you later. What we're asking for is for you to help us catch this guy before more of you are murdered. And they were able to establish bonds of trust with this subculture that was definitely illegal and criminal, but the people knew they weren't going to get popped, they weren't going to get busted, they weren't going to get, taken for a ride. They were just going to help catch this guy. And he was also, murdering people on the other side of the state in Pierce County. They did not pursue this line of reasoning. It didn't occur to them. But in Spokane, they did a marvelous job. One of the great victories, I must say, for Spokane is that all of the shelters for homeless women on the street required that they be drug and drink-free, that they not be clean and sober in order to stay in these shelters. Well, these women that he's picking as victims aren't clean and they aren't sober. In fact, most of them ran in the same little crack crew. So the health and welfare people were saying, we need to get a shelter for these women where they can stay and be safe. It doesn't require them to be clean and sober. And they were able to get that funded, able to get it opened. Ironically, the day that he was captured, someone said, oh, good, now we can close that shelter. But the Volunteers for America stepped in and have kept it open and kept serving that population. What Spokane wisely termed women of a high-risk lifestyle. They didn't want to use the terms, prostitute or call girl or hooker or drug addict or whatever, because they felt that was pejorative and didn't increase the sympathy and compassion that was required for the community to pull together to try to catch this guy. So they simply referred to them as women of a high-risk lifestyle.
Now, how many years are we talking roughly that this reign of terror that Robert Lee Yates Jr. inflicted on Spokane and the Seattle area, how many years are we talking about?
We're talking about too many. Way too many. I mean, it went on. Now, as it is brought out in the book, there was tragically a simple mistake made. They knew they'd been told to look for the guy in a white Corvette. When a cop stopped Yates, gave him the ticket, and accidentally wrote down that the car was a Corvair instead of a Corvette.
Yeah.
Now, because of that slight little error, that went unnoticed. And I'm sure that policeman just, kicks himself constantly, thinking, well, gee, we could have caught the guy years earlier, because that's actually how they got him, was by that the thing with the Corvette. But that delayed things for quite a while. I mean, show you how extreme it got. They found some tire tracks that were identical at the murders in Spokane and the murders in Pierce County. So now we've got something, right? And they analyzed the tire tracks and discovered the reason they matched is because the law enforcement departments in both areas used the same brand of tires. It was the police vehicles' tires that they were, getting the tracks of, and not the perpetrator. It even got to the point where the Spokane Homicide Task Force sat there in a meeting and looked at each other and said, what if it's one of us? Yeah. It could be one of us. That is true, because there have been situations like that in the past where the killer turned out to be law enforcement, or the bomber turned out to be someone from the fire department,
Yeah, This sounds like something. Well, obviously, these are the kinds of stories that I see on Law and Order. About a year later, with twisted around. So, well, this one's out of Criminal Minds as well. So, but anyway, the other thing that was interesting, and that was one of the more fascinating aspects, is the cops looking at each other and talk about spooked. That there was also some other aspects are very, very Hollywood-esque. There's a talk radio show guy that's a real pest, spreading misinformation, hassling the task force, and then there's a dubious author there writes a book. So tell us about. Are you
referring to me?
No. Well, he wasn't.
I know what you're talking about.
He wasn't helping you with this either.
Oh no, not at all. The radio host and the other author are the same person, and that's the Mark Furman, famous for the convicted felon himself in the O.J. Simpson case for perjury, etc. Not highly admired by the Spokane Homicide Task Force at all, and he was doing a radio show, and he was highly critical of the Homicide Task Force continually, and would harp on them, and the task force was very unhappy with him. They thought that he was causing more emotional pain to the victims' families, stressing things that weren't important. And essentially, from what I can gather, that the purpose of his book, Murder in Spokane, originally was to mock the Spokane Homicide Task Force for not having solved the case yet. Just as the book was going to press, from what I understand, they solved the case and arrested Robert Lee Yates, and he came to them saying, "Oh, gee, please, will you, give me access to all your stuff and tell me how you did it?" And they basically told him an interesting trick he could do in a hat and up a rope that defies all laws of nature. And that's when I showed up. And so they weren't exactly favorably predisposed to true crime authors when I walked in the door, but we had some very long chats and to ascertain what my approach was, what I wanted to do, and they wound up being incredibly cooperative and exemplary, sharing everything with me that could be shared. There were some things that were sealed by the court that there's no way to get, but as far as the investigation, every detail of the investigation is made available to me, and of course I went out and I interviewed many of the people myself. Thanks to Arthur, was able to connect me up to a lot of the people that, well, some of them had got the hell out of town, and you got drug treatment somewhere else to just get off the street and get out of harm's way. That everyone was very helpful, very cooperative. Kel Walker, who was on the task force there, kind of head guy, was just marvelous. He later ran for sheriff, didn't get the position, but really, everyone was just extremely cooperative. The only delay we had was on photographs, because Yates cut a deal with the prosecutors that he would tell them where this one body was buried that they couldn't find if they would take the death penalty off the table, which they agreed to do, and so he did. It turned out the body was buried in his backyard. Guess you feel close to it. But the Pierce County prosecutor backed out of the deal and put him on trial for 2 murders in Pierce County, and he got the death penalty.
What grounds did he renege on, though?
They just decided they just didn't want to go along with the deal. He changed his mind. So Yates was pretty furious about that, as you can well imagine. So it was a very, very difficult situation. Okay, hold on just a quick second. I'm live on the radio. I heard someone want to ask me a question. I'm live on the radio.
Yeah. Now, let's tell our audience, because you described it very interestingly, too. It's like Jennifer Joseph came back from the grave to get Robert Lee Yates Jr., really. And tell us how. There was the Corvette, and then there's the bus.
Yeah, well, there was one of the fellows on the Homicide Task Force, whose name slips my mind right now. I don't have the book in front of me, but he really had almost lost faith that they would ever really get a connection. And even if they found that Corvette, what are the odds that they're going to find a direct link-up of evidence years later? Because he had sold the car to somebody else.
Right.
So who knows what condition it's in. Well, when they finally get that lovely white Corvette, underneath the seat still was the button that was missing from Jennifer Joseph's blouse.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah. I mean, that's almost like divine intervention.
Yeah.
Or like someone says, like Jennifer making like this is, I need to make sure they're going to get this guy. And they did. And you know, when he got his sentenced to 400 and some years in prison, you know, he read off his litany of, I want to apologize to the family of so-and-so, and of course it sounded very hollow. Same thing in Pierce County. It's a little late to apologize. And then, of course, he found Jesus in prison when no one knew that Jesus has even been arrested. And, well, I guess he had been. And, you know, you know, it's not unusual for people on death row to get a religion. The reason he hasn't been executed isn't just because they're like trying to find a, you know, a space in the electric chair or whatever, but the reason is that I believe that on the appeal, because he was sentenced to 400 and some years in prison, he has to serve those 400 years first, and then he can be executed on the other case, because one case took priority because it was done first. So that's the only thing that's keeping him alive, is he has to serve those 400 years in prison before he can get the death penalty.
Now, what kind of representation? He was you know, like this former Desert Storm guy, and had a decent job. What kind of representation did he have at trial, and what was their sort of, well, that obviously didn't work. What was their attempt at, what kind of strategy did they have for defense?
Well, you got to remember that he did not plead not guilty. He pled guilty. He confessed to all of them on the condition that if he showed them where I think it was Murphy's body was buried, that they wouldn't execute him. And so anything that happened at those hearings where he cut that deal was sealed. I mean, there wasn't any arguments about anything except, do we have this deal with the prosecutor where he gets life in prison, you know, for cooperation.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't a defense.
Okay.
You know, there was what you'd call a mitigation. In other words, are there any mitigating circumstances where we should show this guy mercy and compassion? You know, I mean, his father got up and talked about him, and you know, and stuff like that. But I mean, the crimes were so heinous, and it's kind of like if you took, and I'm sure a lot of people who listen to your show have read your excellent book, The Trophy Kill, The Shall We Dance Murders, and know how shocking that one murder is. Well, all that stuff that your guy did, this guy did about 20 times, at least.
Yeah. And we're talking about the necrophilia, so that's, again, it seems an odd characteristic that these serial killers share. But there's
it is a very peculiar one, this thing of being able to enjoy copulating with people who are deceased.
Yeah.
I guess that probably has to do with control. You know, doesn't matter how much they object, there's nothing they can do about it because they're dead. I don't understand it myself. Rachel Bell could probably explain it better than I could.
I think it's just the biggest taboo. I think that's what I mean. I think if people were to look for, I think there are some people that like doing that, whether it's Halloween or just walking down with as many piercings as they have. They want to get a reaction from you. Well, these people really want to get a reaction from somebody, you know.
Yeah, well, of course, it's simultaneously they don't want to be caught, and simultaneously they're bragging about what they do by the way they don't hide the bodies, they display them on, you know, things like that, almost to taunt the police, you know. There's also what's called, as you know, criminal pride, where they start being so proud of getting away with this stuff that they, you know, get stranger and sloppier as things go on. You know, they may be very meticulous on the first few, and then get not quite as meticulous later on. Although Robert Lee Yates certainly learned his lesson not to shoot someone with a .357 at close range when their head's in your lap. And also, he would, as soon as he'd shoot them, he'd put a paper towel over the wound and then a plastic bag. If he didn't want them, the place getting messy. They really searched to find the brand of the paper towel and where he was buying it, and it's one of the few things they were never able to find out.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But they were able to get fingerprints off of plastic bags, off of like hefty bags, or plastic bags, which is, unexpected and very unusual.
Yeah, that was a pretty innovative technique to be able to do that, because they weren't always able to get usable prints off surfaces like that. So.
Yeah, the science is so incredible now, and so even the last few years, what's transpired in terms of. But the only problem with that is many homicide detectives tell me, is that jurors expect things to be like CSI Miami. When that's not very realistic. You don't always have this, incredibly accurate and matching DNA, hair strands, blah blah blah. It's not as easy. You don't solve the case in 42 minutes with commercials either.
Was there any offering of explanation whatsoever? I know that we had this killer here, Colonel Russell, where he was this guy piloting the prime minister, the most powerful men in the country, and his status in the military was super high profile and super trusted Air Force pilot. And yet he committed these murders, and his action and behavior was very much like BTK. Was there any discussion about how could someone of such good background, family life, career, had everything going for him, and have this other alter ego, or was there any explanation offered by anyone?
They say it's usually not that deep. Brent Turvey always says they tried it, they liked it, they did it again. I mean, a lot of people have all sorts of fantasies, but they're fine as long as they stay fantasies. Once someone who fantasizes about killing people actually crosses the line's been crossed. That's after that point, if you've already murdered people, there's really no valid reason to, stop doing it. And it's always pretty much a life script issue. They do the same play over and over again. They just cast different people in the role of the victim. That's usually the same play over and over and over again.
Was there anything that he did early on? I know that he changed his MO basically by dealing with different victims. He quickly learned that lesson. But in terms of, you said sometimes they get a little sloppier at the end. Was there something he did that he didn't do at the beginning, or what was really his downfall?
Well, they started zeroing in on people that were likely suspects that were well known to have dated most of the working girls in Spokane, and they went to them all and asked for DNA samples, and everyone was very cooperative, except Yates refused, which of course he could legally. So then they said, well, being he's making such a big issue of refusing, they waited until he was like, in a Denny's restaurant having something to eat or drink, and then they'd go over and they'd take the glass off the table to get the fingerprints or, one thing or another. You have to be kind of tricky sometimes. And then he went to his wife, and of course she was totally shocked. They've been having some trouble. She thought maybe he had a gambling problem, but it was a lot worse than she imagined. And she stayed she's still married to him. She stayed very close to the Homicide Task Force, and Christmas cards and everything. And of course, Yates doesn't grant interviews. He did get a call from, I think, the woman from KREM-TV, Channel 2 in Spokane, wanted an in-depth interview, and he said, aren't people sick of me by now anyway? What else can I say that, would make any difference? And he said that he was in such terrible denial of the effect of his actions. It was like, you do this thing of disassociating, it just go numb. And then he said, of course, when it hit him how horrible he was, then that's when he had no place to turn except to the Lord. I don't even know how sad the Lord was to see him, but and I mean, look at it. Feel about his kids. I mean, he has wonderful kids, darling daughters who love their daddy. You know, the daughter stands up and says, "Daddy, well, I can't understand how you could do such horrible things, and I love you so much." You know, that's so tragic. I mean, it's tragic from every angle, every angle.
Yeah,
but the book is fascinating.
Yes, it is. Well, you know, the thing is, your books are always multifaceted. You always have time to delve into other areas that you are willing to discuss, and what I thought was very, very, you should be complimented about it, or
okay, I'll take a compliment.
Is that you put a human face on these victims, and you talk about these people because, again, the reaction of people is reason why these people are victims in the first place is because people don't regard them as some of the other victims, the innocent.
Exactly.
I talk about the innocent people, and it's got to the point where Spokane is not the only place. We talked many times before about Vancouver's situation where there was big denial that there was even a serial killer on the loose, and meanwhile you got Robert Pickton or the Green River Killer. A lot of these serial killers, the vast majority of these serial killers, have figured this out, that these people are the people that they target. And yet,
well, you know, in Vancouver you had a semi-unique situation where there was, 3 reasons why they didn't investigate the case. One of them was they couldn't afford it. The other was they didn't know how. And it was just too much to worry about. They didn't really want to, and they knew. I mean, they knew that someone was bumping these people off. The women were saying our friends are being murdered, and they're going, well, we don't want to talk about it. In fact, there was some, more than one person for a while bumping people off, and the cops used to say, oh, this is one of so-and-so's victims, but they never really went after so-and-so. Very, very upsetting situation. Because as I mentioned before, an investigation of this kind is very expensive and time-consuming. It calls on a lot of resources. In Spokane's situation, I believe the federal government, maybe the Department of Justice or something, did give them like a grant or something. It was all over $12 million because that's how much money they, put into, this investigation over all those years.
Yeah,
not an easy thing.
No, and the thing is, by the time they have enough murders that a task force has to be set up, and then multiple police agencies, there's usually not just the city police, the province comes into some capacity, like you talked about, Washington State Police got involved, I believe, in the task force. So what you do have is that's where you start getting a lot of resources, travel, getting everybody up to speed, and dedicating a bunch of officers full-time, around the clock to be able to do these things, especially when you get mounting bad publicity and negative
so you
press.
got to figure with all the costs of that homicide investigation task force, and they're not getting results this year, the next year, and there's more bodies being found. And they go, well, what's the use of this homicide team? They're not catching this guy, and want more money and bigger budget and more staff, Yeah. What are you going to do, raise our taxes to catch a killer? And so it was very, very difficult. Plus, these guys, these homicide detectives are so dedicated. I mean, they're taking this, they're living this, every day at work, and I'm sure they can't turn it off when they go home at night. And killers don't keep a 9-to-5 schedule. They're liable to be called out and find a body at, any hour of the day. And I've talked to a lot of homicide detectives who finally get to a point where they go, I just don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, well, if it's just repeating itself, I mean, it'd be enough to do something like this, 15 murders, a span of decades, and then you're going to do it again? Who has the energy for that? Just this, it's...
The only one I know is Robert Yerbury in Tacoma, who could retire if he wanted to, but he doesn't want to. He enjoys the work. He's very good at it. Doesn't seek a lot of glory. He's one of the top homicide detectives in America. He was lead detective in the book I did, Headshot. And he's still working. One of 3 generations to have worked with the Tacoma Police Department.
Wow. Now, did you say that he didn't really grant any interviews except on one news agency? What was his response to your request? And I'm sure you tried.
No, it wouldn't talk to anybody about anything. I mean, they were still in the process of what the hell they were going to do about Pierce County pulling out of their agreement. It was still quite a chaotic mess. And at the time that that I was doing this book, and they did hold, the book would have come out, the original edition, of course this is the new updated edition, but the original edition would have come out sooner if I'd had the photographs. So because there was going to be a trial in Pierce County, the photographs were being shipped there for use, and so I kind of had to wait until they were willing to share them with me. And they wouldn't share actual body photos, but more like geographical, body dump sites, investigative stuff.
Yeah.
So the pictures are not gruesome in body count as they are in some of my other books. I mean, I don't pride myself on the gruesome photos, and I don't select them. I just send the photos that are available to the publisher, and they have someone got standards and practices or whatever select the photos they feel are most appropriate.
How much would this case affect you overall? You've written other true crime. How many true crime books have you written, and how particularly affected were you by writing this book with knowing two or three of the victims, really, and being so involved and connected with this story?
That was a very, very strange thing. The fact that it was close to home, the fact that I lived in the same town, that I knew some of the victims, that the area where he was, this East Sprague area, happened to be the area where my friend Arthur's family lived. There were 2 homes there that belonged to them, and I could see the exact areas they were talking about, the corners, and Arthur and his family would take me around and introduce me to different people. In fact, there's portions of the book where I talk about Darla pulling some stunts in Arthur's father's house. They showed their strength of character and ability to being a small little critter, she could boss around and dominate just about anybody by force of her personality. Of course, you can't boss around someone who's going to put a gun to your head. But that was difficult. Not as emotionally draining as Murder in the Family, because that was little kids being killed, and little kids were the same age as my daughter. One of them had a birthday that was only 2 days different from mine, so the bedrooms were exactly the same. The sheets, the toys, the pictures on all that stuff was exactly the same. So that was very, very difficult. But this was difficult from the standpoint of knowing the families of the victims, or even knowing the victims, puts it on a whole other level.
Is this serial killer the worst serial killer you've had to write about?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think, actually, in terms of the killers I've written about, this fellow has certainly murdered more people. I've written about various kinds of psychopaths and disturbed people who murder for no reason whatsoever, or murder for fake reasons or delusional reasons. But this is the only one where I've followed the episodic, and I guess if there's a criticism of the book, is that it's episodic, is that the word? But that's how the investigation went. Each body was a human being, and each human being has their own story, their own life, and and so each investigation is like an episode. It all ties together.
Yes. We talked about the particular situation with East Sprague and these people, these vulnerable people, and we talked about this before, but just for the record, what is your position on, there's no real way of fixing society, but what's your position on prostitution itself?
Decriminalize it, absolutely. Decriminalize it, allow them to unionize, have safe working conditions. Other countries do. Most of the working women are in favor of decriminalization more than legalization, for the reason they say there's no difference between legalization and being illegal. It's still controlled by the same people. They control it either way. But if it's decriminalized, where it's just, a business, service business, and with where you can have health and safety standards and all that sort of thing, and protection, it is extremely difficult for a woman in that profession to go to the cops and she gets beat up or raped or robbed. There's even, I think I recount in the book, a case in Canada where these guys murdered the woman for fun, and the judge said, well, because she was a prostitute, it's okay. Well, of course, he wound up losing his job, but I think they only did a couple of years, each 3 years.
Yeah. Well,
that's pretty shocking.
The thing is, too, is that there is this side of that the police are frustrated, and there's a certain segment of them that are probably prejudiced against these kinds of people or think less of these people as well, just like the regular population. But they genuinely have sort of an animosity because these women, regardless of whether people are disappearing off the streets, still put themselves directly in harm's way. So there's a frustration, I think, from police that, you're trying to save somebody that barely wants to save themselves because they're jumping into cars.
Yeah, so the thing is, they do keep a list of what they call like the bad trick list, so that the different women know that if you see a guy who's got this car, that car, he's not safe, he's dangerous. They keep a list. The lady who worked for the city who would hand out the free condoms and provide counseling and all that sort of stuff kept that list. And they'd all share the information, who to watch out for. Yates was not on that list because he was very nice and very polite, except the ones he killed. The ones he killed couldn't talk about it. There was one woman who did manage to survive. She didn't know she'd been shot. She thought he hit her in the head or something because he was mad at her. But actually, she didn't know she'd been shot until several months later. She was in a car accident. And when they took x-rays, they discovered she had bullet fragments in her skull.
Now, what did they find out from the information in terms of, because there was no other survivors, there was really no witnesses to the kind of savagery that this guy was capable of, or at least what did she tell police from her experience with Yates?
Well, it pretty much fit the pattern. She cut a deal with him to perform oral sex for X amount of reasonable dollars. After 7 minutes, she wasn't able to become aroused, and all of a sudden she had this sharp pain in her head. She thought that he, out of anger and frustration, he hit her. Actually, what he'd done is he'd shot her. But as she said, she may have zigged when he thought she was going to zag, and the bullet didn't go exactly where he wanted it to go, and it kind of ricocheted off part of her skull. She didn't lose consciousness and didn't even realize she'd been shot until they were x-rays taken of her head several months later.
And it must have been about the time that he was using, just because, like you said, a 357 is going to leave a huge mass.
He only used a 357 on the first two people he killed that we know of in Walla Walla, the friends of my family. He used a 357. But then he quickly learned to go to a 22, it was a low-caliber weapon.
So it's an interesting story with the survivor because, again, amazing. Nobody even writes fiction like that. She doesn't even know she's shot till.
Yeah. And of course, she saw that when he was arrested, they put his picture all over the TV. Of course, she recognized him immediately.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, that she must have thanked her lucky stars that night for sure.
Oh yeah, she said she thinks it was a divine thing, a divine intervention, and, well, to quote her, divine intervention and the fact that she gave good head.
Yeah. That was a quote? Okay.
Yeah.
Really dig deep for information, Burl.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's incredible. So the latest update on Yates is you think that he's just likely not going to...
I don't think he's going to be...
He'll just die in jail, that's all.
Yeah, I think they have to wait till he serves 400 years.
That'll be a while.
Yeah.
Where is he right now? Where's he doing his time?
He's back in the same town where he once worked as a prison guard, the town where he killed the first two people. He's back in Walla Walla, Washington, in Washington State Penitentiary on death row as a model prisoner, of course.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I thought that was another interesting aspect of this, is that he was a prison guard and then he ends up back in the same prison he worked in. That is an odd twist.
So did I. In fact, in the book, there's the picture. They take the employee photos the same place they take the prisoner photos.
Yeah.
You know, and I have his employee photo and I have his booking, what do you call it, intake photo when they sent him to the prison. Taken the same place, same camera, same room, just several years apart.
Yeah. And have you heard anything from inside the prison in terms of how Yates is, how he's doing, what his interactions with other...
Being a military guy, very disciplined, like many of these kind of guys, he is absolutely a model prisoner. Never a problem. Kind, courteous, cooperative. No difficulties whatsoever.
And no threats from other prisoners?
No, if he'd been murdering little kids, he'd be dead by now. But no. Maybe they have to have in a little bit of a protected mode sometimes. But like I say, it's not like he was Jeffrey Dahmer. So when you're killing kids, you can almost be assured you're going to get bumped off, unless you're in Alaska, at which time they just put them in general population.
Yeah, really. So Yates is doing okay. His training has served him well.
Yeah, of course, now I say, according to him, he's very, very religious, and he knows that people probably can't forgive him for having murdered so many people, but, what else can he do except serve his time, serve it well, and there's not too many ways you can make amends to people after you've murdered their daughter or sister or whatever.
Yeah, and we talked about too that there wasn't anything to the trial, but the fact that the death penalty was on the table really changes any kind of trial anyway, doesn't it? That's where you start getting these plea bargains. You get these incredible deals that people are willing to
and it really makes it interesting, because the death penalty is supposed to be reserved for the worst of the worst. And the Green River Killer was probably the worst victim, 47 or something like that victims.
49,
didn't get the death penalty. So when the Green River Killer doesn't get the death penalty, and Robert Lee Yates doesn't get the death penalty, and it's supposed to be reserved for the worst of the worst, then who can get it?
Yeah, but there's so many wrongfully convicted, maybe single murders or double murders, so that, again, why I'm against the death penalty is because they make mistakes, and they make a lot of them.
Like that a horrible mistake in Texas where the guy was executed for allegedly killing his children in a house fire, and it turns out all the experts examined and said, well, actually he was trying to save his kids in the house fire, but they'd already executed him.
God. Yeah, God help you if you're involved with that. That's all I can say. And in America, many states are abolishing the death penalty, so there's less of an appetite for it.
Of course, then again, perhaps it's so wise you can compromise and have it on the books and not use it. In other words, so it's always there as a way of saying that this is such a horrible, horrible crime, that this is what perhaps should happen to you, but because of compassion and mercy and not wanting to make a mistake, we're not going to. The reason I mention that is sometimes people look at things in some of the holy books of the world's religions, like stone this person to death if they're an adulteress, and things like that. You go, well, how cruel. But usually they don't read the rest of the paragraph. For example, in some religions, I think in Islam, for example, an adulteress, people committing adultery would be stoned to death. However, you must bring 4 witnesses to the actual physical act of adultery in order for that to take place, which is virtually impossible. So the message being, this is how bad it is, so don't you do it. It's like the only person you can really have any influence over is yourself, and if you're going to accuse somebody else, you better be able to bring 4 witnesses who saw him do it.
It cancels that out, doesn't it?
Yeah. So the thing is, the way of communicating how, with what disfavor it is viewed, but making it virtually impossible for someone to hopefully go after somebody else other than themselves, you know.
Yeah, the only thing is that a lot of states are experiencing, fiscal concerns, to say the least, because to afford these prisoners all the necessary appeal processes is very, very taxing, money-wise.
Well, yeah, we certainly want to stop having the appeals because that's what the reason they have so many appeals is because it's a matter of life or death.
Yeah. Yeah.
And therefore, if there's been any errors of judgment or errors of law, I mean, there's no such thing as loopholes in the law. It's just the law.
You would think.
Yeah, it's just the law. There aren't loopholes. It's just the law.
Only creative defense lawyers see loopholes.
Well, no, actually, I think it's people who object to the outcome of something not being the way they wanted it, who say, oh, he found some loophole in the law. No, he just found the law. You apply the law to the case, hopefully, and if the jury does what they're supposed to do and applies the law, the principle to the existing evidence, or lack thereof, then they're charged with coming up with, what hasn't been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. In the United States, I don't know what the wording is out there. And if the answer is no, then you can't find them guilty if you have any reasonable doubt. Well,
with some reasonable doubt, yeah. Well, we've seen the, Casey Anthony case. I mean, that was
that one. They charged her all wrong to begin with. There was no evidence. That was insane for them to have made those charges against her when they actually had no case. They had no evidence. There was nothing but reasonable doubt about everything. All you have to do is listen to Nancy Grace and everyone had coming up with their own theories while the thing was in progress, which I can't stand to do. But there was no hard evidence. They overcharged or overreached or whatever, and which that happens quite often. People taking a case that they think they can win based on God knows what, but if it has to do with the jury having to apply the actual law to the actual evidence or lack of, you're going to get different outcomes than people's imaginations conceive.
Well, you do have a lot of cases. The one thing I do notice between Canada and America, the difference is that we normally don't take, I don't see it. They don't take circumstantial cases to a jury. They don't take cases where there's no body, no weapon, no body. Just sort of a Casey Anthony case. I mean, there's a body, but there's a lot of, there wasn't much connection.
Yeah, that's the thing. There was no connection. There was no hard evidence. It was all just speculation, and you can't convict someone, hopefully, on murder out of public relations and speculation. There has to be actual evidence that convinces you beyond a reasonable doubt.
Well, I've seen a lot of judgments where it was circumstantial, though, and they made all the connections. The prosecutor made those connections, and the jury went along with it. That's very interesting to me as a Canadian because I just don't see those things. I do not see that kind of. I don't see the charges initially in the first place like that. So if they are unlikely to get a conviction, then they are hesitant to lay charges here.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, one of the things here is they say, can we get a conviction? Not is that person really guilty, but can we get a conviction? And that can lead to some tragic outcomes.
Well, I don't think that's fair. I just think you just have this hypervigilance. The person that's going to be a prosecutor their whole life and not go and swing to defense is maybe a guy that's a little more, takes the law a little more seriously. That being said, they're only human beings. He's fighting against this person that will, I think a lot of prosecutors believe that defense lawyers have the ability to twist that law or they have an advantage. So when the chips are down, when it looks bad, when their job is on the line, or their reputation or pressure, I think they resort to who they think is guilty. but they do break the law.
Oh, we see that a lot with police departments. We'll get tunnel vision on who the suspect is, and they don't go after someone, or they limit their options because they decide, oh, we think this person is a good candidate.
Well, I mean, there are some cases where a few officers vouch that no, this is the guy. I know this is the guy, and so I think sometimes you do get characters that are convinced themselves. I mean, obviously, some of these, and the psychopathic killer is a great example of a guy that's very, very convincing of a lot of things. Gacy was let out. Gacy had a 10-year sentence. He was out in 6 months. And if circumstances were different, he would have, who knows what the body count was. So some of these people are fantastic liars. That's obvious. So
Gacy
there's bright police. Pardon me?
I don't know if you had the Gacy's lawyer on, who of course went on to be a judge. But it's like Christmas Eve, and John Wayne Gacy is suddenly just blurts out, I got all these bodies in my house. I'm going to have to add on another floor. I've run out of space to bury people.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you say when someone tells you this? It was a hell of a Christmas.
Yeah, well, it was an interesting show. You had them on too, Sam Amarante and Danny Broderick with their book.
Yeah, Gacy.
Wow, it's just I could read that wasn't the first book I read. Killer Clown by Terry Sullivan, and both books just essential if you really want to see the mind of what an incredible tale. That's all I can say. It's just amazing. So, yeah, these guys. It really shows that as smart as police can be, as trained as they can be, these killers are still a mystery, I think, anyway. I don't think anybody's really cracked these guys at all. A kid have interviewed the 36 of the worst serial killers to come up with criminal profiling, and that's limited in its use, really. But
I'll tell you one thing. A lot of people think that these serial killers and psychopaths are complex. It's exactly the opposite. They're missing the emotion chip. They live in a two-dimensional world where they're the center of the universe. And it's, like I say, they tried it, they liked it, they did it again. They have no empathy, no compassion. But the thing is, it's not all sociopaths and psychopaths become criminals and killers, just like the majority of pedophiles never do anything to a kid. It stays in the realm of fantasy. As long as it's in fantasy, fine. But when it crosses that line, you got a big problem.
Well, I mean, especially these days with the advent of the Internet, a lot of people that maybe would have had a hard time finding sort of violent S&M magazines, and there was always places I think you could get it or you could order it or it was tolerable.
Yeah, but the thing about S&M and B&D, not to be confused with bed and breakfast, is that the person who's in control at all times is the submissive person. They create the scenario, they write the symphony, and the dom, male or female, simply follows their script, follows their instructions. The people, a lot of research has gone into this, the people who enjoy that sort of thing are usually people who are decision makers under a lot of pressure to make decisions, and they like to create the illusion that they are not in control. Of course, they are in control because they create the scenario where they're not in control, but it's like a vacation.
Yeah, but what I'm talking about too, though, is the like-minded individuals now have the ability to fantasize at a different level, and then because there's different levels of these people wasting their objectivity and their delusions and fantasies, delusions, not necessarily hallucinations, but definitely these people seem invincible. Once they've experienced that one fantasy of murder, then why not do it again? Maybe even escalate it, maybe even improve the fantasy a little bit, improve the experience.
Yeah, well, a mentally healthy person, unless it's a crime of passion, they snap, doesn't go out cold-bloodedly murder people. And I think that the Internet offers, for people who have a fantasy life, not of murder, but say of some of these other things, a perfectly safe way of fantasizing and interacting with like-minded people who remind each other we simply keep it in the realm of role-play and make-believe, where no one really, it's like you're playing swords and sorcerers, or playing, well, we used to play cowboys and Indians. We didn't really go out and kill Native Americans, and the Lincolns didn't go out and kill people who rode horses.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's fascinating for me to see that these people cross into that taboo area where everyone else, the cannibalism, the necrophilia, the murder, the mutilation, the reveling in it, the trophy taking,
it's remarkably rare, and yet we are fascinated with it. You probably know Dr. Scott Vaughn. He's currently working on a new book on why we are so fascinated and enthralled with these characters, and I position that it's very similar to what happened with Frankenstein and Dracula and all that. The back when those movies just really scared people, eventually wound up being Abbott and Costello meet them. It's having these shared nightmares that fear from a distance, because the brain doesn't really differentiate between make-believe fright and real fright, but there's that part of your brain that says, it's only a movie, it's only a movie, it's only a movie.
Yeah, it's incredible. So this is a re-release of Body Count. This is a popular book because this is not the first time it's been re-released as well, isn't it?
Well, there's been more than one printing because of the demand, and a lot of schools or criminology schools, college-level courses use the book. Have the students read it as like you would a textbook, because it covers a lot about investigation and a lot about psychopathy and that type of thing. So it's worthwhile. I mean, I write these books hoping to save lives. If you can learn something from these books, the way you can get yourself out of harm's way, that you can see what's going on. Maybe we can find a treatment, a cure for this thing someday, or keep more people alive by getting them out of those situations. And it's not easy to write these books emotionally or financially or time-wise, but we do it because we think we're doing something important.
Well, it's a fascinating slice of history as well, because these things don't happen in a vacuum. It happens over a period of years, and all these lives that these people touch, and it really is a very aberrant point in society when something like this happens. Everything else is somewhat understandable, but something like this is almost non-comprehensible. And
one of the criticisms of my books, that one of the things that some people don't like, is I do make a real effort to put it in a sociological and historical context. Because you say this doesn't happen in a vacuum. And I did add, there's a section added to this new edition of Body Count that was taken out of the first edition, but they decided to put it back in, and that is the historical background of how the situation of these women put them on the fringe of society, where it didn't used to be that way. Prior to the Harrison Act of, I think, 1919, there was no link between drugs and crime in America, and things were much different then. But so if you can see the context of how we got in this situation, how do we have people that are such easy prey that can be murdered with people? Thank God he's only killing those people and not real people like us. I try to give a sense of perspective. Some people don't understand that. Other people love it. I know you do. And so obviously,
for true crime readers, you're one of the biggest names in true crime, and your style is different than other people's. Some people, it's not to criticize, but it's very by the numbers in terms of this is what it is, and the background is not cookie cutter, but it's very conforming to other books that you've read, and then there comes a trial, and there you go.
Yes, there is a format that true crime books usually follow. The one I have that is most iconoclastic is one called Man Overboard, The Counterfeit Resurrection of Phil Champagne, which is currently out of print. It should be back soon. And that's totally different. I violated every known rule of true crime writing in that one. But you try to do different things with form and structure. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. With Fatal Beauty, I tried to do it almost as if it were a documentary, like a verbal video documentary. Some people liked it. Some people thought it was a little soulless, but I still want to get into the historical and social perspective of what this means. You know, what does this have to do with us, with my family, my culture, my America? You know, because I do write American cases only.
Yeah.
What does it? What can we learn from this? How did we get here? What does this mean? And my mentor, Jack Olson, who was probably the greatest true crime writer who ever lived, told me that any book that doesn't explore why and how is pornography. That you have to get into what does this mean? What can we learn?
Well, Jack Olson was a fan of yours as well, and I'm a huge fan of Jack Olson. For me, he is the guy, the guy that could write true crime like nobody's business, and he's the best ever.
Wonderful writer. I got to tell you, when I read his book, Salt of the Earth, I read the first page, and I told him, I said, I want to go take my word processor and throw it in the Pacific Ocean because I could never write a page as good as that. And he laughed, and he was very, very supportive of me. And you know, he would go on these big anti-true crime diatribes about how it all turned to crap. And I called him and I said, Jack, I just read this big thing you did about how all true crime now is a bunch of garbage. I said, how about saying except maybe for Burl? And a couple other, and he says, Burl, he says, whose name is on the cover of your book saying Burl Barer writes true crime at his best? There's more people will see that on the cover of your book than will see the article I wrote. He was always very supportive of me.
When you get an endorsement from Jack Olson, that is just very, very, very special. Yeah. And then I like the idea of any author really coming forward in the book, at least to have some voice, because it's almost unnerving to me for an author not to, especially at these profound moments in a book, to not at least somewhat have opinion about that. I mean, I know the journalist is supposed to be so.
The technique I use, I think people have picked up on it, is I'll have people giving running commentary. There'll be commentary by Chet Rogers, a well-known newsman, or there'll be commentary by Travis Webb, who was my investigative assistant on some of these books, or there'll be commentary by Jeff Reynolds, a opinionated true crime author. Well, I doubt you've ever seen very many books by Jeff Reynolds, because that's me. So the author can, except at the end where it has, you know, the author's end notes or the author's commentary at the very end of the book, where I express my opinion on everything. But in terms of the commentary, I like to find people who can, like a round table of commentary of, you know, different views. And in Fatal Beauty, for example, I actually asked a variety of other true crime writers their opinion on one aspect of the case, and they gave me permission to quote them. So you have all these other true crime writers weighing in on their opinion. They didn't agree with each other, but that made it even more interesting to me.
Yeah. How many true crime books do you have now under your belt, Burl, and what's your latest?
Let's see. Man Overboard was the first. Murder in the Family, Headshot, Body Count, Broken Doll, Mom Said Kill, and Fatal Beauty, however many that is in terms of true crime. And I've got a couple that I think will be coming out as shorter e-books that didn't quite make it to full length because the case may have been a little bit older. For example, in the book Masters of True Crime, which is a joy to be in, that was edited by R. Barry Flower, 17 true crime writers, all contributing. I just love that book and so proud to be part of it. I was able to tell the story of the mail bomb conspiracy, which originally was going to be a book many years ago that ran into a whole other set of problems we'll talk about on another show. But I was finally able to tell that story. And I've got a few other ones that I'd love to tell that would be shorter. It wouldn't be book length, but would be fascinating true crime stories that you haven't heard of before.
Yeah, Masters of True Crime is really a great thing, and the story that you have in there is fascinating. So I'm glad it did make it finally to.
Oh, and I got to tell you, the United States postal inspectors were so incredible in their cooperation with me on that story. I cannot praise them enough. It was just beyond anything I could have hoped for.
Well, what I found interesting, too, is when we start doing this Yates story, when you said that the police were kind of wary because they had Mark Furman there, and so they wanted to know. And I had said to you in their earlier interview, well, all they have to do is look at your body of work. All they have to do is read one of your books, and they would see the perspective. Because really what they were looking for is the tabloid-esque kind of perspective, misinformed,
Yeah, that's what they were so worried about.
Journalist.
They'd already seen that. Actually, they got hold of Ann Rule and asked her about me.
Ah.
Yeah, and Ann and I, we just writers workshop together. Whidbey Island, and we've always got along great. And in fact, she is, my family is in one of her books, and she is actually shows up as a character in my book, Man Overlord, because the main character's daughter and her daughter were best friends.
Ah, interesting. And her daughter's a writer, too. She's a fictional writer.
Yeah. Runs in the family. Of course, everyone in my family is a writer, too. Lee Goldberg, Todd Goldberg. My sister, may she rest in peace. It's just one of those family things, like the Barrymores.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and for those people that don't know, and we got to put a plug in there for this as well. The True Crime Uncensored on Outlaw Radio every Saturday afternoon. Put a plug in for that, and also the adaptation, the live adaptation and television adaptation of True Crimes on American Horrors with Hart Fisher's television station. So tell us about both of those things that you have going on a regular basis.
Well, True Crime Uncensored airs Saturday afternoons 2 to 3 o'clock on outlawradio.tv or outlawradiousa.com, either one. You can always just look it up, True Crime Uncensored. We have a website, truecrimeuncensored.com. Tells you who the guests are. And there's a player on the right-hand side that plays past shows, if you like. And I do that show with Howard Lapidus, who's a show business legend. He's the manager of Dr. Drew Pinsky, an executive producer, Celebrity Rehab, Real Rehab, and all the Dr. Drew shows. And he won a Razzie for Freddie Got Fingered, which he produced. Starring Tom Green, Worst Picture of the Year. He was very proud of that. And our fact checker, Mark Boyer. Now, a few years ago, my co-host was the great attorney Don Waldman, and repeats of those shows were running on HearWomenTalk.com for quite a while. And Hart, being a big true crime fan, asked Don and I if we would participate at various times in recording some stuff and doing some features. He taped a true crime roundtable that Don and I did with Private Eye Fred Wolfson and the great Lowell Caulfield, author of House of Secrets, and what we have. Don did a fabulous interview with Jerry Estes, author of Stilettos and Steel, that will probably be on sometime in the future. We love working with Hart. It's, we kind of do it, a little bit at a time, once in a while. We never quite know what format it's going to be, but we love working with Hart, and anytime something shows up that he uses us in, we're thrilled.
Yeah, it's a great program, too, and I've seen a couple. Anthony Flacco's program, Road to Hell, I believe it was
that's when Hart was a co-host on the show with Don and I, and with Matt Allen's permission, videotaped the actual radio show and put it up on, as a video cast, and also the shows where Hart was a guest. I like it. They show our interview with Hart just before they run his movie, The Garbage Man, which is great.
Yeah, no, it's a great channel. So you've got yourself very, very busy. And
matter of fact, I'm going to be doing. You'll see me on Deadly Sins on Investigation Discovery. I think in January or February, an episode based on Mom Said Kill, and then they're also going to do one based on Murder in the Family, and then Behind Mansion Walls, also on Investigation Discovery, has tapped me to do a show based on Fatal Beauty. So you'll see a lot of me on TV this year.
Ah, great. Good for you. Fantastic. Well, Burl, I want to thank you very much for coming back onto the program and talking about body count and all the new, some of the new developments. So we can't wait for something new to come out again. You're very, very prolific in that area, so I know you're cooking up 2 or 3 things at one time. I'm not even surprised. So,
thank you so much for having me on again. I always enjoy being on your show.
Well, thank you very much, Burl, and we'll be in touch. And for those listening, you've been listening to the incredible and incomparable Burl Barer talking about body count and the re-release of Body Count and the story of Robert Lee Yates Jr., one of the Spokane serial killer. So a very, very fascinating case and a very, very fascinating book by Burl Barer. So thank you very much, Burl. And
you're welcome.
Have yourself a great evening. Thank you very much, Burl. Good night.